Well, thank you, Conference. I suppose if you're from outside London, you might wonder why this election matters. But the size of London's economy means that if London's run on Labour's values of fairness, the whole country benefits. You may think, why does he want to stand again when the Tories have clearly spelt out it's going to be a brutal fight? And I have to say, losing last time was tough. But these 3 years have given me the chance to listen and to see things in the way that ordinary Londoners see them. London's an absolutely amazing city, but it's going in the wrong direction. Only a few years ago, London was leading the world. Yet now the image of our city is of civil disorder and violence on the streets. And unless we change City Hall, nothing will change on our streets. Boris Johnson campaigned for the Tories to be elected into government, and he got what he wished for. Unemployment is above the national average. The cuts in funding to our councils in London are above the average for the rest of England. Rail, tube and bus fares are soaring. So I'm campaigning to put ordinary Londoners first. I see the impact on young people in our city of the Tory policies when I visit the schools and the colleges in London. The Tories say we must cut our national debt, but they're piling debt on our students. And with London's high cost of living, repaying those debts will be felt very sharply by young Londoners. That next generation needs a champion in City Hall, and Boris Johnson didn't speak up. He didn't lobby MPs against the abolition of the education maintenance allowance. He praised plans for a private university with £18,000 a year fees, saying it was unambiguously good news. Boris Johnson is the problem. He is not the solution. When Tory Wandsworth Council said it wanted to introduce charges for kids to play in their local playground, Boris Johnson thought it was such a good idea that he appointed the leader of Wandsworth Council as his new Chief of Staff. Clearest signal you could get about where he wants to go. So that's why I'm standing, to remove a mayor who attacks the youngest in our society, smashing their aspirations with debts and with cuts. Our campaign will be about fairness, putting ordinary people first and defending their public services. I'll stand up for those ordinary workers on the sharp end of this Tory government and its policies, from teachers and nurses through to pensioners. Boris Johnson stands for a privileged minority. He says anger over the bankers' bonuses is just whinging. He's campaigning to cut the top rate of tax. He's the leading Tory in Britain, campaigning and demanding a cut in the top rate of tax for the 1% of people who earn over £150,000 a year. Now, that's not surprising, because instead of sticking just to his day job, Boris Johnson's got a second job on the Daily Telegraph where he earns £250,000, so the tax cut won't do him any harm at all. He called that salary chicken feed. Yet while fares are rising steeply, the number of people on six-figure salaries at City Hall has nearly doubled. 28 members of staff now earn over £100,000. 3 years ago, that was just 16. And when The Guardian revealed the phone hacking scandal, Johnson dismissed that as Labour Party codswallop. Even after the revelation that Millie Dowler's phone had been hacked, he was still out there doing interviews, defending News International and praising Rupert Murdoch's role. Well, I'm proud that whilst Boris Johnson was defending Murdoch, our Tom Watson fought to make sure that Andy Coulson was forced out of Downing Street. This election is about putting Londoners first. We need to cut crime, not police numbers. 3 police commissioners in 3 years has been a disaster for morale in the Met. And as the Tories slash the police budget, you know crime will rise. But Boris Johnson started cutting police before Cameron took office. And after this election, his plans are to reduce the number of police officers by another 1,800. I don't want my kids growing up in a city where police numbers are down and crime is up. I don't want our police overstretched when there are riots on our streets. We're already taking that fight to Boris Johnson. We won a council by-election in Boris Johnson's own ward in Islington, where local people turned out to vote against Johnson's policy of cutting police sergeants, forcing 600 sergeants to reapply for their own jobs, and only half of them were going to get them. Our candidate in that by-election, Alice Perry, down there, one of our hardest working volunteers. Thanks, Alice, for beating Boris in his own backyard. When I got the news about the bombings in London in July 2005, I was in Singapore with Tessa, where we'd just won the Olympic vote. All I wanted was to be back in London immediately, as soon as I could. But where was Boris Johnson when we had the riots this summer? He refused to come back. We had the amazing situation of Londoners demanding their mayor come back to deal with that crisis. What personal example does that set about his priorities? And I'd say this to Boris Johnson. What's the difference between rioters and a gang of overprivileged, arrogant students vandalising restaurants, throwing chairs through windows in Oxford? Come on, Boris. You explain the moral difference between your Bullingdon vandalism as a student and the criminality of the rioters. Frankly, neither is an example I want for my kids. And then there's the fares. This January, they're going up another 7%. And Johnson has done a deal with the government that fares will be increased by 2% above inflation each year for the next 20 years. A bus fare is already up 56% under Boris Johnson. A weekly 1 to 4 zone travel card costs £416 a year more than it did when I left office. That just isn't fair, and people are right to be angry, and it's our duty to speak for them. So this is what I intend. I'll put ordinary Londoners first by protecting policing. Any cut to frontline policing made by Boris Johnson between now and that election will be reversed when Val Shawcross is my deputy and I walk into that building at City Hall. I'm not going to campaign to cut the fares for the richest. I'll be supporting Ed Bull's plan for a cut in VAT, not a cut for the richest 1%. And unlike Boris Johnson, I am in it for London. I'm not in it for myself. I have no desire to be the leader of the Tory party. And I'll demonstrate that the day we take office. I will freeze the salary of mayor for 4 years. I will freeze the salary of my senior staff for 4 years. And I'll only do one job. There'll be no moonlighting on the Daily Telegraph either. My job will be to press the case for students who are struggling to make ends meet. And our campaign is going to fight to defend our NHS, hospital by hospital, A&E ward by A&E ward, right the way across that city. Over the last few months, we have led a whole range of activities online, breaking new ground. Our volunteer website, you heard Tessa, yourken.org. Well, tomorrow we take another step in that campaign. I will announce my plan for fairer fares, and I'm going to do it by text. Our campaign will be the first to announce a key policy by text, so switch your phones on now. Behind me, you can see our campaign text number. Text Ken to this number, 66007, and tomorrow you'll be the first to hear how we'll be holding down the fares. In every year, in every part of London, inner London or outer London, fares will be less and fairer under me than they would if Boris Johnson gets a second term. Let Boris Johnson defend his policy of high fares for Londoners and low tax for bankers. Everywhere he goes, my running mate Val Shawcross and our team of Assembly members will send our message to Londoners. Boris is making you less well off and less safe with higher fares and less police. That will change with us. Over this last year, I've had the pleasure of working with Ed Miliband. I've watched him stand up to Rupert Murdoch, and he won. Now he's taking on the appalling unfairness of this government's policies. If you want to see a fairer Britain, that means a Labour government under Ed Miliband. Since we elected Ed as our leader, tens of thousands of new people have joined, enthused and wanting to see real change. And a lot of them must wonder if we can ever match the great achievements of Labour's past: full employment, building the NHS. But when I look at the problems we face, rebuilding our economy on fairer lines, making something somebody else wants to buy, being a bridge between Europe and America and the rising new economies in Asia and Latin America, and tackling climate change, which is the greatest threat to survival humanity has ever faced, I believe, I am certain, our greatest achievements lie ahead. And in Ed, we have a leader whose combination of principles and visions mean we can make those changes and make a better world. Thank you very much, Conference.